with eyes open. I covet truth. Beauty is unripe childhood's cheat. I leave it behind with the graves of youth. William Blake. With long practiced skills, she blocked out the emotions that boiled across the diner and focused on her own anger and betrayal. Her brown eyes locked onto the man on the other side of the table. "Is there something else you wanted to say about your former marriage?" He was calm as he looked up from his menu, but Mira Frayne could feel his surprise, knew it as clearly as if it had registered on his face. Her empathic sense was stronger at close range. Even the hurricane of conflicting emotions that raged around them couldn't conceal him. She watched him pick up his water glass, carefully take a sip, then dry his fingers with equal care. "Well, Adam, is there anything else?" Adam shifted, finally beginning to show discomfort. "What else is there to say, Mira? My marriage is over. I divorced my wife. Is something wrong?" His face never changed expression, and his voice was flat, nearly monotone. His surprise faded, replaced by supreme confidence. Confidence in himself, in his ability to tell people what they wanted to hear, to keep himself content, to lie with a straight face. "Wrong? Oh yes, there's something wrong, you lying sack of—" Mira reined in her emotions. She had learned early on that when experiencing something as strong as anger, she would start projecting the emotion, involuntarily influencing the people around her. The last thing she wanted was Adam guessing her emotional state. Mira had encountered too many people like Adam in her professional life, people who had come to her for counseling, even if they weren't aware of the need. There had been enough of them for her to know when someone was trying to bury the truth under layers of emotion. Mira knew how to poke and prod the minds of her clients to get them to reveal the truth. She was quite good, so it had come as a shock to hear that Adam had lied to her without the slightest hint of guilt, and she hadn't suspected until it was too late. "Let's just say I had a feeling, Adam. I always act on my feelings. They're usually right." Mira's eyes narrowed as she dug into Adam's emotional landscape, trying to find some weakness. "Okay, let's play a little game. I'll throw out some hints, and you tell me who I'm talking about." Adam shook his head, his neutral expression twisting into an insulting smirk. "Let's not. I'm not in the mood for games. You're right. There is something else I have to say about my marriage. For example, it's not my former marriage. I'm still married. My wife decided we no longer needed intimacy in our lives. I needed someone to keep me company at night. Dating you was certainly less expensive than some other options I had." Mira's left hand clenched into a fist so tight her nails began to cut into her palm. At the table behind her, she could hear arguments start where people had been chatting happily. Mira knew she was beginning to lose control of her emotions. Her anger was starting to influence the people around her. "Is that all I am to you, Adam? Some cheap whore you could use when you wanted?" "Basically. My only question is, how did you figure it out? You seemed pretty content up until now." "Let's just say your wife's not happy at all with you. She came to me for counseling. She didn't know I was the one you were using to get your rocks off, but she knows that you're getting some on the side." If he was concerned, Adam didn't show it. Mira didn't even feel it on his emotional landscape. "Won't be the first time I've had to do some fast talking. Certainly won't be the last. Shall we order now?" Mira closed her eyes and reined in her anger, clamped it back under the vice-like control she usually maintained. The argument behind her was getting worse. "Goodbye, Adam." Adam stared at her, then shrugged. He pushed away from the table, stood, and walked away. She watched him for a moment, then massaged her eyes and buried her face in her hands. Mira had hoped confronting Adam would make her feel better, fill her with a sense of triumph. To her surprise, she was filled with despair and regret. She had hoped the confrontation would lead to an improved self-image, so that she could again look at herself in the mirror without thinking of how she had been used and deceived. She didn't hear the waitress come up to the table. "Hi, my name's Robin. I'll be serving you tonight," she said cheerfully. "Are you ready to order, or would you like to wait for the gentleman to return?" Mira looked up. The waitress stood patiently, waiting for her. Late 20s, Mira guessed. Sandy brown hair surrounding an angular face. She was slender and pretty and in no way threatening. But as she continued to look into the waitress's brown eyes, Mira began to feel as if she were hiding something, keeping a secret from the world at large. "Miss, would you like a few minutes?" Mira shook herself, dismissing the sense of dread that suddenly came over her. "No, that's all right. He won't be coming back." She scanned the menu, deciding in an instant. She ordered a cup of clam chowder as an appetizer, followed by the fisherman's platter, a plate full of fried scalloped clams and shrimp that was guaranteed to raise her cholesterol level. Robin noted it on her pad. "Anything else?" Killian's read. The waitress nodded and walked away. Mira watched her stop at another table, check on the two men sitting there, then start for the counter and the double doors that led to the kitchen. For reasons she couldn't identify, Mira reached out, tapped into the waitress's emotional landscape, and felt nothing. For a moment, Mira was stunned. People always felt something, depending on the situation at hand. Happiness, sadness, anxiety, fear, lust. There was always some kind of emotional response to the world. Yet when she touched the waitress's mind, she had felt nothing. On an emotional level, the woman was a blank slate. Not even a sense of well-being. Robin stopped before passing through the doors. She hesitated and looked back at Mira. The smile on her face was almost wicked and seemed to say, "I know what you did." Her smile grew as she disappeared into the kitchen. Mira continued to stare as waitresses and busboys pushed through the double doors. No one, in all her years as a counselor, in all the years she had used her empathic skills to walk the emotional landscape of the people around her, had ever sensed her intrusion. Robin had sensed it. Even more surprising, she seemed amused by it. Dinner was nothing more than a blur to Mira as she tried to understand what she had sensed. Every time she saw the waitress, Mira tried to tap into her emotions. Each time, she felt nothing. Maybe I'm slipping. Maybe I'm just irritated about Adam and I'm not paying attention when I reach in. It's not possible for someone to be completely blank. Even newborn babies have basic emotions. Mira closed her eyes and massaged her forehead. She could feel a headache begin to pound behind her eyes. Maybe I should just go home and go to sleep. "Would you like something else? Something for dessert, maybe?" Mira looked up. Robin's voice had surprised her. "No, that's all. That'll be all." Robin nodded. "I'll be right back with your check. Let me take those." She gathered up the dishes and silverware and walked away. Mira watched her disappear into the kitchen. She was still confused by the lack of emotional response in Robin's mind. She was afraid there might be something wrong with her senses. She reached out to the nearest mind and poked around. Her target was a young man, early 20s, sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. Mira felt despair and anger radiating from his mind. And the more she poked around, the more disturbed his landscape became. An image, the face of a young woman, began to form. Relieved, Mira eased out of the man's mind. Nothing wrong with me, she thought. I sensed him clearly enough. So, if my senses are fine and it's impossible for a person to not feel anything, why can't I feel her? And how does she know when I'm poking around in her mind? Footsteps disturbed her reverie. Looking up, Mira saw Robin approaching. She slipped out the check and set it on the table. I'll take that when you're ready. Hold on, let me get my card. Mira reached into her wallet, slipped out her MasterCard. She held it out to Robin, and their fingers brushed together, just a gentle touch. And Mira felt a rush of emotion so powerful, it threatened to overwhelm her. Mira squeezed her eyes shut, suddenly feeling lightheaded. It felt as if the entire building had started listing from side to side. The voices of the other people in the diner began to echo. What felt like static electricity or hundreds of small insects began to dance up and down her arms and legs. Sweat began to run down her face and back. A hand touched her shoulder. Ma'am, are you all right? As fast as the sense overload started, Mira couldn't think of a better name for it. It stopped. Her mind started to clear. Mira nodded, her eyes still closed. Fine, really. I just got a little dizzy. My blood sugar must have dropped. She opened her eyes, looked up, and gasped. Crawling across the table was a number of small creatures. They were multi-legged with segmented bodies. They reminded her of large, almost metallic spiders. Mira's eyes dropped to her hands and another gasp escaped her. Millipedes or centipedes wove around her fingers and crawled up her arms. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She barely heard Robin's voice. Miss, are you all right? Mira didn't miss the almost amused tone in Robin's voice. Mira looked around, her head moving in jerky motions. More creatures, larger, most defying description, circulated among the diners. Some seemed to be watching her, while the rest appeared to be watching the other people present. Mira wasn't sure what frightened her more, the presence of the creatures or the fact that, of all the people in the diner, she was the only one who knew the creatures were there. Miss? As suddenly as the creatures appeared, they vanished. Confused, Mira looked around, eyes growing wide, fear raging through her mind. Slowly her eyes returned to Robin, who stood patiently, smiling contentedly. Miss, can I get you anything? Mira stared, then buried her face in her hands. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you bring me some chocolate syrup? Chocolate milk? No, just chocolate syrup. My blood sugar must have dropped. Oh, to God, that's it, she thought. Yeah, it's happened before, so I usually keep some chocolate with me, except for now, of course. Robin nodded. Okay, I'll be right back. Mira massaged her eyes and began taking deep breaths, trying to slow her racing heart. She had begun to calm down when she heard Robin's voice again, except now Robin's voice was in her mind. Don't fear the Adichas. They mean no harm. Like all living beings, they just want to be left alone. Their only weapon is secrecy, going unnoticed by the human race. Mira squeezed her eyes shut as she began to shiver. Here you go, Robin said, as she placed a small glass and spoon in front of her. I'll be right back with your card. Mira drank the chocolate syrup and waited for the sugar rush to hit her bloodstream. It took a few minutes, but she began to settle down and feel somewhat better. She took several more deep breaths and hoped that whatever it was she had just experienced was over. She tried not to react when she heard Robin's voice in her mind again. "The Adichas have accepted you. We will speak again later, when you're feeling better. Then the mantle will be passed." "I wonder if I'm going to get an explanation," she thought. "Later," Robin's voice said. Mira shook her head and looked around. Robin was walking back to her table, a look of satisfaction on her face. "Here you go," she said as she placed the receipt and card on the table. From an apron pocket, she took out a pen and handed it to Mira. As she signed, Mira asked, "Am I going to get an explanation?" "Later." Robin took the receipt and stepped away, checking another table as she passed. Mira watched her disappear through the double doors, questions still dancing in her mind. She fished $5 from her wallet, dropped it on the table, and stood. With one more look at the kitchen doors, Mira left. Rather than flag down a taxi, Mira walked back to her apartment. It was only a few blocks away, and the warm spring air should have made her feel better. But as she walked, Mira began to feel as if she were being followed. Seeing the sidewalk empty didn't help her frame of mind. She could still feel eyes watching her, following her every move. She began to walk faster. Her apartment complex, a series of low brownstone buildings, seemed to welcome her as she made her way through, heading for one of the rear buildings, away from prying eyes. She looked around quickly before pushing into her building, and then ran up the stairs as if she were being chased. At her door, Mira fumbled with her keys, twice trying to use the wrong key to unlock the door. Finally finding the right one, Mira shouldered into her apartment, looking back behind her, half expecting to see more of the creatures she had seen in the diner. Mira slammed the door and locked it without looking. She stood in the darkness, her back to the door, nervous trembling shaking her body. She squeezed her eyes shut, and she began muttering under her breath, praying to God that whatever was happening to her would stop. She heard quiet scratching, just as she heard Robin's voice. "Would you prefer to stay in the dark, or are you going to turn the lights on?" Mira reached for the light switch. As the lights flared on, she saw Robin standing in the middle of the living room, 12 of the creatures surrounding her. "What the hell's going on? Who are you? What are these... Relax. I'll explain everything." Robin waved a hand toward the sofa, appearing completely unconcerned by the creatures. "As I told you before, they're called the Adichas, named by the ancient Hindus. They arrived here from elsewhere 2,000 years ago." "Elsewhere? You mean elsewhere is in another planet?" Mira took several deep breaths to calm herself. Robin considered. "Not quite another planet. Another plane, perhaps. I'm not really sure. My predecessor wasn't sure, so he couldn't tell me." "Predecessor?" "I have been with the Adichas for 1,000 years. I was born in the year 968 in what we now call the Netherlands. I was always different from everyone else. Like you, I always knew what the people around me felt, and I could hear what they were thinking. And that was why the Adichas chose me, and that's why I chose you." Mira paced around the living room. The 12 Adichas watched her, some with segmented eyes, some with eyes that looked perfectly human. 2 seemed to have no eyes at all. She stopped in front of Robin and reached into her mind. "I still can't feel you. No emotion, no thoughts, no images. Nothing at all. Why is that?" I'm tied to the Adichas, have been for 1,000 years. Everything I feel, everything I think is all run through them. You can't sense them, so you can't sense me. But I can see them. But you can't sense them. You will soon. They've accepted you. Mira looked into Robin's eyes. Still not finding the answers she wanted, she went to the kitchen. She took a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. You said that before, that these Adichas accepted me. Why would they have accepted me? The reason they can't be seen by everyone else. I don't quite understand it, but the Adichas are intangible, non-corporeal. They describe themselves as being out of phase with the rest of the world. If it weren't for me, they would fade away like morning mist. Mira drained the glass. Very poetic. Why did you come here? Why did they come here? And what do they want? Robin laughed, a short, humorous laugh. That's the story. From what I understand, their home became uninhabitable. After searching for a decade, they found Earth. They were a little surprised to find the human race already living on the planet. When they found their condition, they selected the first of us, a Hindu man named Kessin. That was when they picked up the name Adichas. He stayed with them for 1,000 years. Then I was selected. Now 1,000 years have passed, and I have chosen you. Mira returned to the living room. Is that what all this is about? You're looking for someone to take your place? You better keep looking, Robin. I don't intend to spend the rest of my life playing nursemaid to a bunch of itinerant extraterrestrial ghosts. You don't understand, Mira. There are 72 billion of them. Without a human anchor, they would all die. Do you really want that on your conscience? Don't try putting a guilt trip on me, lady. I don't know. I didn't know these things existed this morning. Trust me, I can forget they exist pretty quickly. Mira looked around the living room, lingering on each of the Adichas. What do they want? Just like any living being, they want to live. But some of them are a little more belligerent than others, shall we say. The Adichas began to move around, 6 taking a position on Robin's left, 6 on her right. Gesturing at the ones on her left, she said, Ansa, Bhaga, Datri, Ravi, Surya, and Yama advocate peaceful coexistence with humanity, essentially continuing as things have been. Varuna, Savitri, Mitra, Indra, Daksha, and Ahriman want to take the planet for themselves. Humanity will have it, or the Adichas will have it. You said they don't mean any harm. Well, they don't, as long as someone is here to break the deadlock. That's the other purpose you will serve. These 12 lead the 12 tribes of the Adichas. You, however, decide their course of action. So if you get really angry, you could change your mind and they'll attack. There's 72 billion of them. They'd overwhelm the planet before we could do anything. Correct. But I only wanted to do that once during World War II. Since then, I've been pretty content to let humanity be. Mira closed her eyes. What if I say no? Robin's voice was cold. That wouldn't be a good idea. It would be the last thing you ever do. If you refuse, the police will find pieces of you spread around the city. I thought you said they couldn't interact with us. Mira was surprised at how calmly she took the threat. Under certain circumstances, the Adichas can interact with humans. They don't take rejection well. My predecessor chose 2 other people, both of whom rejected them. I don't think the authorities found all the pieces. Mira turned to Robin and felt her eyes go wide. The 12 Adichas began to advance on her. She began to back toward the door. Mira reached for the lock as Robin said, "Running won't accomplish anything. It'll only delay the inevitable." "Maybe, maybe not." Mira twisted the lock, opened the door, and backed out of the apartment. Ignoring the creatures that swarmed up the stairs, she started running. The Adichas changed direction and followed her like a black wave. Mira rushed out of the building, looked to the right, then turned left, heading for the parking lot. Maybe if I can get to my car, she thought. Maybe I can get away from them. More Adichas surged toward her as she reached her car. They reached her as she shoved the wrong key into the lock. One of the larger ones, which vaguely reminded Mira of a lobster with 6 more legs, wrapped itself around her left leg. Mira lost her balance and fell to the ground. The Adichas surged forward, enveloping her in a living cocoon. Mira screamed, but no one heard. It's been a long 100 years. Mira stepped up to the large window that filled one wall of the hotel room. She pushed aside the heavy drapes and looked out at the parking lot below. With some concentration, she forced herself to not see the Adichas that wandered among the parked cars. "You never told me that, Robin. I had to learn it on my own. Just like I had to learn to keep moving in order to keep people from suspecting that there was something not quite right about me." Mira sighed, closed her eyes, and leaned forward until her forehead pressed against the glass. The memory of the last night played through her mind again. From being overwhelmed by the Adichas to waking up in her apartment, surrounded by the 12 Adicha leaders. Robin lay dead on the living room floor, a contented smile on her face. Daughtry asked what they should do with the body. Not knowing what else to say, Mira told them to get the body out of the apartment, telling them that it would be hard to explain where the body had come from. She couldn't forget what they did, nor could she forget how they cleaned up the mess. Mira stepped away from the door and turned back to the room. Even in the darkness, she could see the 12 leaders. They were always with her now, traveling with her as she moved from place to place, to keep people from wondering why she never aged. She sighed again, and for a moment, she felt her 142 years. Mira walked to the bathroom. She turned on the light and stared at her reflection in the wall-mounted mirror, wondering if anyone guessed that what they saw when looking at her was not her true appearance. Her dark brown hair had long ago turned gray and begun to thin. Her skin sagged and seemed to hang loose from her bones. "You didn't tell me that either, Robin. You didn't tell me I'd continue to age, even though I'd still have the same strength and good health I enjoyed 100 years ago." Mira turned from the mirror and leaned heavily on the vanity. 99 years to go. Mira turned from the mirror leaned heavily on the vanity. Only 900 years to go. 900 years until I'm free of them. One of the Adichas, who she now recognized as Surya, inched forward, chattering as he approached her. Mira hesitated, listened, and nodded. She reached out and caressed Surya's exoskeleton. Don't worry, Surya. I've only been with you for 100 years. I don't wish to be free of you. If I sound as if I do, please forgive me. I'm still getting used to being with you. She continued to stroke Surya's back, then lay on the bed. I have to be more careful, she thought. I should learn to hide my thoughts from them, if I can. Mira sighed and closed her eyes. As she felt herself drift off to sleep, she tried to ignore the prickly feeling of the smaller Adichas while they crawled over her body. She thought, please God, let the time pass quickly. Please God, 900 years to go. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Hamlet, Prince of Denmark.